is not the time. This is not the time for that, sir. Yes. No. No, it is disrespectful to the audience. Yeah. Yeah, no. There we go. That's okay. Here's the thing in America. The good news is, in other countries, the guy would end up in jail for yelling at a president. Here he's allowed to express himself, and I want to apologize for the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Brutal invasion of Ukraine. In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Iraq, anyway. 75.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No, Liz. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me."
If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel. People should understand by now, this should be crystal clear, that Israel is the single greatest strength America has in the Middle East. I always say to my friends when they say those things to you, I say, imagine our circumstance in the world were there no Israel. How many battleships would there be? How many troops would be stationed?
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use them against our friends, against our allies, and against us. And there is no doubt that his aggressive regional ambitions will lead him into future confrontations with his neighbors. Confrontations that will involve both the weapons that he has today and the ones he will continue to develop with his oil wealth. The risk of inaction are far greater than the risk of action. And the entire world must know that we will take whatever action is necessary to defend our freedom and our security.
The decision to go to war in Iraq and to remove Saddam Hussein from power in a coalition of over 40 countries led by the United States of America was the hardest, most momentous, most agonizing decision I took in my 10 years as British Prime Minister. For that decision today, I accept full responsibility. Without exception and without excuse. I recognize the division felt by many in our country, and in particular, I feel deeply and sincerely, in a way that no words can properly convey, the grief and suffering of those who lost ones they loved in Iraq. Whether members of our armed forces, the armed forces of other nations, or Iraqis. The intelligence assessments made at the time of going to war turned out to be wrong. The aftermath turned out to be more hostile, protracted, and bloody than ever we imagined. The coalition planned for one set of ground facts and encountered another. And a nation whose people we wanted to set free and secure from the evil of Saddam became instead victim to sectarian terrorism. For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe. I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we received was wrong. I can also apologize, by the way, for some of the mistakes in planning. Of course, you can't say that those of us who removed Saddam in 2003 bear no responsibility for the situation in 2015.
It's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology.
America shouldn't be doing the fighting for every nation on earth, not being reimbursed in many cases at all. If they want us to do the fighting, they also have to pay a price. And sometimes that's also a monetary price. So we're not the suckers of the world. We're no longer the suckers, folks. And people aren't looking at us as suckers. And I love you folks because most of you are nodding your head this way. We're respected again as a nation. We're respected again. I want each and every one of you to know that we will always protect those who protect us. You protect us. We are always going to protect you. And you just saw that because you just got one of the biggest pay raises you've ever received, unless you don't want it. Does anybody here? Is anybody here willing to give up the big pay raise you just got? Raise your hand, please. Oh, I don't see too many hands. Okay. Don't give it up. It's great. You know what? Nobody deserves it more. You haven't gotten one in more than 10 years. More than 10 years. And we got you a big one. I got you a big one. I got you a big one.
And I am ultimately responsible for what's taking place there because these are my folks. And I'm the one who has to greet those coffins when they come home.
8 years in office and lots of decisions. Does President Obama have any regrets? Well, we couldn't ask him directly, but he has spoken about regrets in the past. Here's a few of them. Libya. Last year, a Fox News host asked Obama a simple question.
Worst mistake?
Probably failing to plan for the day after what I think was the right thing to do in intervening in Libya.
Obama told The Atlantic magazine he misjudged two things. First, how much tribal divisions would play a role in post-Gaddafi Libya. And second, how little he'd be able to rely on France and the UK to help rebuild the country. Of course, those governments didn't quite see it that way. Guns. A lot of mass shootings happened on Obama's watch. Here he is in 2015 talking to the BBC.
The one area where I feel that I've been most frustrated and most stymied, we do not have sufficient common sense gun safety laws, even in the face of repeated mass killings.
Partisanship. Here's the president a year ago giving his last State of the Union speech.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better. I have no doubt a president with the gifts of Lincoln or Roosevelt
might have better bridged the divide. Now, funnily enough, on this issue, Obama really seems to compare himself to his predecessors. The president later told Vanity Fair that maybe he could have gotten more done if he'd had the genius of Abraham Lincoln, the charm of FDR, the energy of Teddy Roosevelt, or the legislative acumen of LBJ. Guantanamo. Obama campaigned on a promise to close the Guantanamo Bay prison. Of course, it's still open. And President-elect Trump wants to keep it that way.
And we're going to load it up with some bad dudes, believe me. We're going to load it up.
So when a 7th grader in Ohio asked Obama what he wished he'd done differently on his first day in office,
I think I would have closed Guantanamo on the first day. I didn't because at that time, as you will recall, we had a bipartisan agreement that it should be closed. And I thought that we had enough consensus there that we could do it in a more deliberate fashion.
finally, Syria. Syria, Obama has said, haunts him constantly. But he told Vanity Fair that he doesn't necessarily regret how he's handled the conflict. Still, he said, quote, I do ask myself, was there something that we hadn't thought of? Was there some move that is beyond what was being presented to me that maybe a Churchill could have seen, or an Eisenhower might have figured out? No doubt President Obama will reflect on his decisions for the rest of his life. So will we, and so will history.
কি জোরে হাঁটছো গো দিদি, আগে তো আমার পেছনে পেছনে হাঁটতে।
আরে আমার স্পিড তো একই আছে, তুই আজকাল টায়ার্ড হয়ে যাস।
হ্যাঁ,
Mr. President, in your speech at American University yesterday, you called this the most important foreign policy debate that we've witnessed since the Iraq War.
Right.
I think if you talk to most Americans, and particularly our generation, they don't necessarily feel that.
Yeah.
I wonder why you think that is.
Well, I lived through the debate of the Iraq War. I wasn't yet in the United States Senate. I was a state senator in Illinois. I don't oppose war in all circumstances. What I do oppose is a dumb war. At the time, there was a drumbeat that going into Iraq was the right thing to do.
We will answer every danger and every enemy that threatens the American people.
A lot of people didn't get engaged in that debate then either. It was only after the decision was made. It was only after the initial push into Baghdad descended into massive chaos that suddenly the country realized that we had made a big strategic mistake. And my point is that now is the time to have the debate, not after decisions are made.
Every nation has to either be with us or against us. Those who harbor terrorists or who finance them are going to pay a price.
What does that make Hillary Clinton to the Bush family?
My sister-in-law.
And for our support for the President's efforts to wage America's war against terrorists and weapons of mass destruction.
The Iraqi regime possesses biological and chemical weapons.
Saddam Hussein's chemical and biological weapons.
The regime is seeking a nuclear bomb.
And his nuclear program.
The Iraqi regime is building the facilities necessary to make more biological and chemical weapons.
Saddam Hussein has worked to rebuild his chemical and biological weapons stock.
And continuing ties to terrorist organizations.
He has also given aid, comfort, and sanctuary to terrorists.
And there are Al-Qaeda terrorists inside Iraq.
Including Al-Qaeda members.
That Saddam has resumed his efforts to acquire nuclear weapons.
His missile delivery capability and his nuclear program.
There is,
As I say in my book, I made a mistake giving the Bush administration the authority that I voted for. It just shows you how hard it is to make these choices, which is why I'm calling the book Hard Choices. Yes, I made a mistake, and I deeply regret the consequences. I've made it very clear that I made a mistake, plain and simple, and I have written about it in my book. Just show you how hard it is to make these choices, which is why I'm calling the book Hard Choices.
Might lead to war should be hard. But I cast it with conviction. I cast it with conviction. I cast it with conviction. I cast it with conviction.
Iraq has one of the largest customer bases in the entire Arab world. It has one of the world's largest supplies of oil. And so it's time for the United States to start thinking of Iraq as a business opportunity. Iraq has the largest customer bases in the entire Arab world. It has one of the world's largest supplies of oil, and it has one of the best educated workforces in the region. Today, Turkish, Chinese, French, Jordanian, Iranian companies are lining up to do business. But very honestly, we see too few American companies alongside our soldiers and our diplomats. Iraqis are looking to rebuild every sector of their economy, not only their oil sector, but agribusiness, transportation, housing, banking, and many others. And so it's time for the United States to start thinking of Iraq as a business opportunity. And the sacrifice that the Iraqi people have made for your freedom is one that we highly respect. According to the IMF, Iraq is projected to grow faster than China in the next 2 years. Look, I know that there have been a lot of questions about Iraq posed to candidates over the last weeks. I've made it very clear that I made a mistake, plain and simple. And I have written about it in my book. I've talked about it in the past. And, you know, what we now see is a very different and very dangerous situation. The United States is doing what it can, but ultimately this has to be a struggle that the Iraqi government and the Iraqi people are determined to win for themselves. And we can provide support, but they're going to have to do it. Have American troops in harm's way, and we knew Iraq would be quite dangerous for a long time, unpredictable at the very least. You have to have the host government, in this case Iraq, say, okay, here's what we want. We're signing this agreement, which will protect American soldiers. We didn't get that done. And I think in retrospect, that was a mistake by the Iraqi government.
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work, and it was President Reagan, partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated, they lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow because we will harvest. So we then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine, you deal with the stingers that we've left all over your country. You deal with the mines that are along the border. And by the way, we don't want to have anything to do with you. In fact, we're sanctioning you. So we stopped dealing with the Pakistani military and with ISI, and we now are making up for a lot of lost time.
Let's take another question quick. What's the last? Yeah, please go ahead.
My name is Shamama. I'm representing the Women Chamber of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. My question will be more focused about my own province, of course. We all know that whole of Pakistan is facing the brunt of whatever is happening and trying to cooperate with the U.S. and somehow U.S. Is a is a mother-in-law which is just not satisfied with us and comes up with new ideas. So we are trying to please you, and every time you come and visit us, you have a new idea to, to tell us you're not doing enough and you need to work harder and all. But yes, whole Pakistan, the economy has taken a nosedive, but especially Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has suffered a lot. Our businesses have suffered a lot. So do you have, I will not call ROZ a failure right now, but yes, it has not done what it was required to do. So do you have any backup plan or any other economic plan as a compensation to this part of the country?
Okay.
Well, now that I am a mother-in-law, I totally understand what you're saying, and will hope to do better privately and publicly. I thank you. That's a great analogy I'd never heard before. I think the two questions are very much related. And yes, we agree that there has been and is a trust deficit. We talk about it with our counterparts. It is something we are trying to overcome. We think it goes both directions. We don't think it's just one or the other. We think that both of us have to work harder to understand more clearly the needs and the interests and the concerns of the other side. And I take that very seriously. And it goes to this question about the price that Pakistan has paid, which I know is a very high one, not only in lost lives, but in lost economic productivity. One of the programs we're still hoping for is the Reconstruction Opportunity Zones, the so-called ROZs, which would target areas that have been particularly hard hit and try to provide more market access and entice investors, Pakistani, American, others, to come into those zones because of the preferential treatment they would get into the American market. And we're still, hoping to get Congress to agree to that. So we do have some plan Bs, but our plan A is to overcome the trust deficit, but to be honest about it, not to pretend, to have a very clear-eyed view of where we agree and disagree, and then to have a work plan and to try to make progress together toward shared objectives. And I think that requires a lot of dialogue and a lot of work between us, which we have to be committed to. And there is frustration on both sides, which I recognize. But I personally believe this relationship is critical, important to both, and therefore we cannot give it up. Once a mother-in-law, always a mother-in-law, but perhaps mother-in-laws can learn new ways also. I don't know what the proper other side of the give and take. And we need your ideas, and we want to listen to you, and we listen to us. And therefore, we are going... We saw? He died. Did it have anything to do with you? No, I'm sure it did.
Dum 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 dum. You don't really know where I'm coming from. True, but I know where you're going to. Not true, I think you ain't got a clue. I know you don't know me. You don't know me. I'm sorry, your dreams tell me what you really mean to say. I don't think that is fair as a general rule. I get so mad at you, but I love you. I know you don't know me. You don't know me. I'm sorry. First and foremost, we'd like to say I bring home the bacon like every day. And when the dog is walked and the salad is tossed, and when the mouths are fed and the pots are all washed, the set to begin. The billows of fluff and the lights are all dim. I am comforted by you in the night. Our pallid bodies fit together just right. Together just right. Together just right. Dum, 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 dum. I love you. I know you. I know you don't.
Do you respect Putin? I do respect him. Do you? Why? Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country. I say it's better to get along with Russia than not. And if Russia helps us in the fight against ISIS, which is a major fight, and Islamic terrorism all over the world, right? Major fight, that's a good thing. Will I get along with him? I have no idea. It's very possible I won't. Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You know, I've been against it for years, the Iraq War. I said, you're going to decimate Iraq. Iran will take over the Middle East and take over Iraq, which is exactly what's happening. And somebody's going to come and take over the leftover oil. And who did that turn out to be? ISIS. So if you look at 2004, exactly what I said happened. So call it vision. I have to call it vision because I'm trying to get elected. First time in my life I'm trying to get elected, right? I'm a politician all of a sudden. But there was a certain vision. I've gotten a lot of credit for it. They made a terrible mistake, and then they made a terrible mistake the way they got out. And in my opinion, they made an even worse mistake not keeping the oil.
In October 2000, the president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, announced they would no longer be selling oil in US dollars, only in euros. So when Hussein decided to start selling oil in euros instead of dollars, the US wasn't too happy. By February 2003, he had sold over 3 billion barrels of oil for 26 billion euros. A month later, the US invaded Iraq in an operation ironically called Operation Iraqi Freedom. They overthrew Saddam, and by June, just 4 months later, the country was back to selling oil in dollars. Years later, a number of US officials started to let the truth seep out. Former head of U.S. operations in Iraq, General John Abizaid, said, "Of course it's about oil. We can't really deny that." Former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan wrote in his memoir that, quote, "I'm saddened that it's politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil," end quote. And former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said the same in 2007. Quote, "People say we're not fighting for oil. Of course we are," end quote. Click the link in the pinned comment to learn more. US